Dust Creek, Kansas, September 1879. The morning started the way most mornings did in that town, with dust on the road and the smell of horses and the particular quiet of a place that had already decided what kind of day it was going to be before most people had finished their coffee. The sky was pale and wide and indifferent. A few clouds sat over the ridge to the west, like they had somewhere better to be, but had not quite gotten around to leaving. Mabel Holt had been awake since before the sun came up. She was 24 years old, and large in the way that the world had always made her feel was an apology she owed to everyone around her. Not tall, though she was that too, standing 5'9" in her stocking feet, but broad through the shoulders, heavy through the hips, built in a way that the women in Dust Creek had spent years describing in careful voices that were worse than cruelty because they dressed themselves up as concern. She had dark brown hair she kept pinned back without ceremony, and hands that were rough from work she'd been doing since she was old enough to be useful, which was earlier than most people would have thought appropriate to ask of a child. She had gray eyes that caught things people did not expect her to catch and held on to them longer than was comfortable. That morning she had pressed her best dress before the light came up. It was gray, washed so many times the color had gone soft, but it was clean and it was pressed, and when she put it on, she allowed herself the small dignity of smoothing it down flat with both palms before she went to start her father's breakfast. Horace Holt was 52 years old and had the look of a man who had been meaning to do something about his life for decades and had not yet gotten around to it. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee, and he did not look at Mabel when she set his plate down in front of him. He had not been looking at her directly for 3 days. She had noticed this the way she noticed most things, quietly, without making a production of it, filing it away in the part of her that had learned a long time ago that the things men did not say were usually more important than the things they did. She thought they were going to town for flour and nails. She had written a list. The wagon ride took 40 minutes on the dry road, and Horace did not speak for most of it. When they reached the edge of Dust Creek, he turned the wagon not toward the feed store, but toward the open square in the center of town where people gathered for market days and livestock sales and the occasional public business that the county saw fit to conduct in front of an audience. There was already a crowd. Mabel looked at the crowd, and then she looked at her father, and something cold moved through her chest. Not surprise exactly, more the recognition of something she had been refusing to name for 3 days, finally stepping out into the light where she could not pretend otherwise. Horace pulled the wagon to a stop. He still did not look at her. "Get down," he said. The broker's name was Orville Cade, and he ran these transactions with the brisk good cheer of a man who had long ago made his peace with the nature of his work. He was standing at a wooden table at the edge of the square with papers spread out in front of him, and a small crowd gathered around in the way that crowds gather when they sense something worth watching is about to happen. He was a compact man in a brown vest with a gold tooth that caught the September light and eyes that moved over everything with quick professional assessment. When Mabel stepped down from the wagon, he looked at her the way he looked at everything, fast and thorough and without particular feeling. "Miss Holt," he said, "good of you to come out this morning." She had not been given a choice about coming out, but she said nothing. "The paperwork," Cade said to her father, sliding a document across the table, "is in order. Guardianship transfers upon payment. The buyer assumes full responsibility for the subject's welfare and legal standing." He smiled at Mabel with the practiced warmth of a man who had learned that smiling made difficult transactions go more smoothly. "You are getting a fresh start, miss. That is how I would encourage you to think about it." She looked at the paper. She looked at the line where her father's name was already written, the ink dry, the decision already made somewhere before this morning, before the pressing of the gray dress, before the list of flour and nails that was still folded in her apron pocket. The crowd had gone quiet in the way that crowds go quiet when they are pretending not to watch something they have every intention of watching. Cade turned to address them with the ease of a man who had done this before. "The arrangement," he announced, "has been made fair and legal. The subject is female, 24 years of age, in good health, sturdy constitution, accustomed to hard work." He glanced at Mabel and adjusted his language with the small courtesy of a man who knew how much courtesy was required, and gave exactly that amount. "Large-framed," he said. "Hardy, well-suited for domestic labor and ranch work." Someone in the crowd laughed. It was a low sound, quickly swallowed, but it moved through the group like a small current and left something behind it, a particular quality of attention, the kind that comes when people sense they are about to be entertained in a way that costs them nothing. Mabel stood in the center of all of it. She had spent 24 years learning how to stand in the center of things like this. The weight of the crowd's attention was not new to her. She knew the specific texture of this kind of looking, the way eyes moved over her and then moved to each other, the small adjustments people made to their expressions to maintain the fiction that they were not doing what they were doing. She had been 12 years old the first time she understood that a room full of people could make a person feel like a problem that needed solving without a single one of them saying an unkind word out loud. She was not 12 anymore. She turned and looked at her father. Horace Holt was staring at the table in front of Cade with the fixed attention of a man studying something extremely interesting at a distance of 18 inches. He would not look at her. He had not looked at her since before the list of flour and nails. She understood now that he had known he would not be able to, and had made his arrangements accordingly. "Pa," she said. He reached for the pen. Her voice, when it came, was steady. She had not expected it to be steady, but it was, and she used it. "Say it plain," she said, not to Cade, to her father. "Say what this is, out loud so these people can hear you say it." The crowd shifted. Cade's professional smile thinned by a fraction. Horace's hand tightened on the pen. "You are selling me," Mabel said. She said it clearly, and she said it to the crowd because her father would not look at her, and the crowd was what was available. "You are standing in the middle of this town, and you are selling your own daughter, like she is something you found in the barn and could not think of another use for. And I want everyone standing here to hear you say, that is what you are doing." Horace signed the paper. The sound the pen made on the paper was very small. The crowd was very quiet. For a moment, the whole square had that quality of stillness that comes just before something breaks. Then Cade said, brisk and cheerful as ever, $40, Mr. Holt, as agreed. He counted the coins out onto the table one at a time. They made small flat sounds on the wood. Mabel watched her father take the coins. She watched him cup them in his palm and slide them into his vest pocket without counting them. He still had not looked at her face. There was something in the set of his jaw, a tightness, a deliberate blankness, that she recognized. It was the face of a man doing the thing he had decided to do because he had decided to do it and was no longer accepting information to the contrary. She had cooked that man's breakfast every morning for 8 years. She had mended his shirts and kept his accounts and sat with him through the winter. Her mother died in the cold kitchen, making sure the fire did not go out. She had been 16 years old that winter, and she had not known how to grieve, and so she had kept the fire going instead, because someone had to, and she had been available. $40. She turned and looked at the crowd. There were faces she knew, most of them. Harriet Peel from the dry goods on 4th, who had once told Mabel's mother that surely the child would grow out of it. Dear, some girls were late bloomers. 3 men from the feed store loading Doc who had spent 4 years making small comments as Mabel passed that were not quite loud enough to require acknowledgement. A woman named Daisy Croft, who organized the church social, and who had never once in 15 years invited Mabel Holt to help with the arrangements, which was its own kind of message. She looked at all of them, and she let them be looked at. "You have been laughing at me since I was 12 years old," Mabel said. She did not raise her voice. There was no need to raise it in that quiet. Not out loud, most of you. In that particular way that is worse than out loud, where you learn the laugh is happening even though you cannot quite point to it. Every market day, every church Sunday, every time I walk down this street in this dress. Harriet Peel looked at the ground. "And now my father has made it official for you," Mabel said. $40. You can all go home and tell your families what a fat girl is worth in Dust Creek on a September morning. She had not planned to say fat. The word came out of some place in her that had spent years being careful and had finally run out of careful. It landed on the square like a stone. She did not wait to see where the ripples went. She walked straight through the middle of the crowd because it was the shortest distance to the other side, and she was not willing to go around. The crowd parted for her in the way crowds part when they are not sure what to do, not out of respect, but out of the particular discomfort of people who have just been named accurately. She kept her chin level. She kept her eyes forward. She did not give any of them the thing they were waiting for. She got past the edge of the square, past the water trough, past the hitching posts, and around the corner of the church where the shadow of the building fell long and cool across the narrow strip of dirt between the church wall and the back fence of the feed store. She sat down in the dirt and put both fists against her mouth and let the shaking come. It was not crying at first. It was something before crying, something that had no name, the physical response of a body to the weight of being precisely as humiliated as it had always feared it would someday be. She pressed her fists harder against her mouth and breathed through her nose and counted the boards in the back of the fence because there was nothing else available to count. She cried for her mother. She cried for the 16-year-old who kept the fire going because someone had to. She cried for the girl who had pressed the gray dress that morning in the dark, thinking today was only flour and nails. She cried for every Sunday she had walked to church and sat in the third pew from the back and told herself that a person could be seen clearly someday if they were patient enough and good enough and quiet enough about all the ways the world made them feel wrong. She had been very patient. She had been very quiet. It had made no difference at all. When the crying was done, she wiped her face on her sleeve, and she sat in the dirt with her back against the church wall, and she made herself a promise the way you make promises that you know no one is there to witness, which means you have to be very precise about what you are promising, because there is no one to misremember it in your favor later. "I will not be afraid of them anymore," she said to the dirt and the fence boards and the September light slanting down between the buildings. Not one of them. Not ever again. She heard the wagon before she saw it. The light had gone gold the way it does in late September in the middle of the afternoon. That particular heavy gold that makes everything look like it is sitting for a portrait. She heard the slow creak of wheels and the unhurried sound of a single horse on the road. And then the wagon stopped somewhere close, and she heard boots hit the ground, and a man's voice, low and without urgency, speaking a few words to the horse. Then she heard Orville Cade's voice, the broker's quick professional tone, coming from the direction of the saloon, where he had no doubt been celebrating his commission with someone else's money. "Mr. Rourke, wasn't sure you'd make it before evening. Got held up at the north fence," the man said. "Where is she?" There was a pause. She heard Cade's voice drop and adjust, the shift a person makes when they are preparing someone for something. Now, I should mention, the girl is somewhat, he searched for the word, larger than the arrangement may have suggested. If you want to renegotiate the terms given the physical considerations, I'd be perfectly happy to. I gave my word on the terms, the man said. "Where is she?" Another pause. Then Cade's voice, lower, rounding the corner of the church. The boots came closer. Mabel shut her eyes. She had decided in the hour she had been sitting in that dirt exactly how this would go. He would come around the corner. His face would do the thing faces always did, the small flicker of arithmetic, the polite adjustment of expression, the careful nothing that people put on top of whatever they actually thought. She had seen this her entire life. She could read it faster than most people could produce it. She had decided she would give him nothing. Not a flinch, not a word. He had paid $40 for a body. The body was here. Everything else was locked, and he did not have the key. The boots stopped a few feet from her. Miss Holt. She opened her eyes. He was taller than she had expected and older, middle 30s, with the particular weathered quality of a man whose face had been outdoors in all seasons for a long time. He had taken his hat off. That was the first thing she noticed, and it confused her, because in her experience, men did not take their hats off for her. He was holding it in both hands in front of him, turning it slowly, and he was looking at her face, not at her body, at her face. She waited for the flicker. It did not come. "You've been crying, he said. "What is that to you?" "Nothing," he said. "Just an observation." He held out one hand. "You want a hand up?" She looked at the hand. "I can get up myself." "Reckon you can," he said. His voice did not change. Was not a question of whether you can, just whether you might want the help. There is a difference. She stared at the hand for a moment. Her legs had gone numb from the cold ground, and her pride could only carry her so far. She took it. His grip was dry and firm, and he pulled her up without straining, without comment, and let go the instant she was on her feet, stepping back to give her room. All of it over in about 3 seconds. The way someone does something when they have thought it through before they offered. "Caleb Rourke," he said. "I run a spread about 9 miles north. Cattle mostly, some horses." He turned the hat in his hands. "I expect you have questions." "One," she said. "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Why would a man pay good money for a woman he has never seen? A man who could have had any arrangement he wanted from that broker. The broker offered to renegotiate the price when he saw me, and you said no. So I want to know what is wrong with you that you would do that." Something moved across his face. Not offense. Closer to a kind of tired recognition. "Miss Holt," he said, "I did not buy a wife. $40 says otherwise. $40 bought your guardianship off a man who had no business holding it." Caleb said. He did not look away from her. "I am going to tell you something true, because I think you have had enough of the other kind today. 3 weeks ago, a man I used to work with sent me word that there was a girl in Dust Creek whose father was planning to sell off her guardianship, and that if someone did not step in ahead of a particular buyer, she would likely end up in a situation that I would not describe to you on a public street. There are men who do that kind of buying. You understand what I mean." Mabel was quiet. "I sent the money," Caleb said. "I bought the paper so the wrong man could not. That is the beginning and the end of what is between us. You are not my wife. You are not my property. You are a woman who needed somewhere to go and now has somewhere to go. When we reach the ranch, you will have your own room with a lock on the door, and the key will be yours. You can leave when you have somewhere better to be. I will pay you wages for whatever work you are willing to do. Same as any hand." She did not say anything. "I know this is just words," Caleb said, "and I know you have no reason to believe a single one of mine, so I am not going to ask you to. I am going to ask you to get in the wagon and let me get you out of this town before dark. Everything else you can decide later." Mabel looked back toward the square. The market was winding down. She could hear the ordinary sounds of a town putting away its afternoon. the creak and drift of people going back to their suppers, the thing they had all watched folded already into the general store of Dust Creek gossip, to be taken out and examined at kitchen tables for weeks. She looked at her father's wagon, still tied at the post. He would be in the saloon by now. My father, she said. He left about an hour ago, Caleb said. He was careful with his voice. If it is any comfort, Miss Holt, I had some words with the man before he went. What did you say to him? Caleb was quiet for a moment. I told him, he said, that a man who sells his own child to a stranger to be rid of her has already lost something that cannot be bought back, and that he would spend the rest of his life knowing it, whether he admitted it or not. Then I told him if I ever found him within 10 miles of my land, I would remind him of the conversation in more emphatic terms. Mabel's throat tightened. She would not. You did not have to do that, she said. Some things a person does because someone asks, Caleb said. Some things a person does because it is just plain right. I do not generally need to be asked for the second kind. He nodded toward the wagon. Now, are you hungry? The question stopped her. It was so ordinary, so plain and small and ordinary, that she stood there in the gold afternoon light with her swollen eyes and her pressed gray dress and could not immediately respond to it. No one had asked her that. Not today. Not in a very long time. Her father had never asked. The town had never asked. The town had only ever watched her eat and done arithmetic with their eyes. I have not eaten since this morning, she said. He nodded like this was a serious matter that required addressing. There is bread and cold ham in the back of the wagon, how? He said, jug of cider that is still about half cold. It is a long ride to Rourke Ridge, and I would rather you not pass out on me in the middle of it. He turned and walked back to the front of the wagon and busied himself with the horse's traces, his back to her, giving her the thing she had not known she needed, which was the privacy to eat without a single pair of eyes counting what she put in her mouth. She climbed into the wagon bed. Her hands were shaking in a minor way that she decided to ignore. She found the parcel wrapped in cloth exactly where he said, and unwrapped it and looked at the bread and ham and the cider jug, and felt the old familiar pull of shame, the years-long message that eating was a thing to be hidden, a thing that confirmed every cruel word that had ever been aimed at her. Miss Holt, Caleb said from the front of the wagon, not turning around, a body has to eat to live. There is no shame in it. There is no shame in you taking up space on this earth either. Wherever you learned to think there was, you can leave that behind in this town with the rest of what they did to you today. She sat still for a long moment. Then she ate. She cried a little while she ate, quietly, so he would not hear. But of course he heard, and he never turned around, and he never said a word about it, just shook the reins and clicked his tongue at the horse, and the wagon rolled north out of Dust Creek, and the town began to fall away behind them in the long gold September light. The road unwound through flat-bottomed country before it began to rise, dry grass on either side, the sky going from gold to rose to the deep blue of early evening. At some point, after the worst of the shaking had passed, and she had wiped her face and could trust her voice again, Mabel spoke to his back. Mr. Rourke. He glanced back once, briefly. I want you to understand something. She kept her voice level. I am grateful you took me out of that town. I am. But I meant what I decided before you came. I do not trust men. I do not trust kindness because in my experience, kindness is what sits on top of a hook until you get close enough to take it. You can be decent to me all you like. You can ask me if I have eaten and give me a room with a lock, but you will not fool me into believing it will last, because it never has. Not once in 24 years, and I am done being the person who hopes for it. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wheels and the horse and the wind moving through the dry grass. That is fair, Caleb said. "That is about the fairest thing anyone has said to me in a good while." He was quiet for a beat. "I will make you one promise," he said. "The only one I will ask you to hold me to. I will never try to fool you into anything. Not into trusting me, not into staying, not into hoping. Whatever you come to think of me, you will come to it yourself by watching what I do and not what I say. And if I ever give you cause to go, I will hitch the wagon myself and point you toward wherever you want to be." He glanced back at her just once. "Deal," he said. Mabel looked at this quiet, dusty, unhurried man who had paid $40 to keep her out of worse hands and then apologized because words were cheap. "Deal," she said. She told herself she did not mean it. She would be gone in a month. She would keep her heart locked up tighter than any door he could give her a key to. She believed this completely. She had no idea, sitting in the back of that wagon with Dust Creek growing smaller behind her, that she was riding toward the first home she would ever truly know. She also had no idea that a man named Sterling Vance was at that moment 9 miles north already doing the arithmetic on everything Caleb Rourke owned and on what it would take to own it himself, and that the girl he had sent someone to buy at that morning's market had just been taken off the table in a way he was going to find extremely inconvenient. But all of that was still ahead of her, for now there was only the road, and the bread in her hand, and the man who had not once looked at her body, and the sky going dark over the Kansas prairie in the long quiet of a September evening that smelled like dry grass and distance, and the particular freedom of moving away from a place that never deserved you. The wagon came to a stop in full dark, and Mabel woke up startled, ashamed she had slept, pressing the back of her hand to her mouth. "Easy," Caleb said, not to her but to the horse. "We are home." The house at Rourke Ridge was plain and solid. 2 stories of weathered timber with a light burning in the downstairs window, the way a house looks when someone thought to leave it on. A barn to the east, a corral. Outbuildings in the dark that she would have to see in daylight to understand. The land around it was invisible in the dark, but she could feel its size the way you can feel a room even when you cannot see the walls. "Your room is at the end of the hall on the right," Caleb said. "East-facing window. The sun will wake you whether you want it to or not. Key is in the lock. It is yours." He moved to help her down, then thought better of it and stepped back. She climbed down on her own. Her legs were stiff and the night was cool and she was a stranger in a strange dark place, and she felt it completely. She stood on the ground and looked at the house. "Where do you sleep?" she said. He understood the real question underneath the question, and she watched him decide not to be offended by it. "Far end of the house," he said. "Amos is in the bunkhouse out back. Cresswell and Silas Dunn, too. Nobody will come down your hall. Miss Holt, you have my word and you have that lock." He paused. "If it would help you sleep," he said, "I will move the dresser against your door before I turn in." She looked at him. "It would help," she said. He did it without asking why. He carried the heavy oak dresser across the small room and set it flush against the door, and did not require her to explain the fear behind the request. When it was done, he stepped back and dusted his hands off, like it was the most ordinary thing anyone had ever asked him. "There," he said. "Nobody getting in here but you. Good night, Miss Holt." He was nearly out the door when she heard herself say, "Thank you for the dresser." He stopped. "You do not have to thank me for every kindness," he said. "Going to be a long stay if you do. I will not be staying long." "No," he agreed easily. "Reckon you won't." He pulled the door shut behind him, and she heard his boots go down the hall and away, steady and unhurried, and she sat on the edge of the bed in the strange dark and waited for the trap to spring. It did not. It did not. The next morning, when she woke to the east light exactly as he had promised, and crept to the kitchen and found it empty and a note on the table in plain, blocky handwriting. Coffee is hot, eggs in the pan, eat, and his initial below that, and not a single soul anywhere in the house to watch her do it. She stood in the kitchen for a moment with the note in her hand. Then she ate her eggs and drank her coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked out at Rourke Ridge in the morning light, the dry grass running up the slope to the north, the sky enormous and pale above it, the barn throwing a long shadow east, the whole place lying quiet and unhurried under the September sun. She told herself she was only staying until she had somewhere better to be. She was lying. She had known it since the wagon. She just was not ready yet to say it anywhere but in the quietest part of herself. The part that had spent 24 years being careful and was only now, in this plain kitchen with this plain note, beginning to consider that careful might not have to be the only way to live. 3 mornings later, Caleb set the ranch ledgers on the kitchen table in front of her. He had been carrying them under one arm like they were something that had been weighing on him for a while, which turned out to be an accurate description of the situation. "I keep books," he said, "and I keep them badly. Amos tells me we are losing money but cannot tell me where. The columns do not speak to me." He set the ledgers down. "If you are willing, I would pay you proper wages to look at them." She looked at the ledgers. They were 3 years of careful wrongness, the handwriting of a man who was earnest and thorough and had no gift for numbers. She took them. She sat at the kitchen table that night with the lamp turned up and the ledgers spread around her, and went through them the way her grandfather had taught her to go through accounts, from the back forward, looking not for what was there, but for what was shaped wrong. She found it just before 2 in the morning. She sat very still for a moment after she found it. Then she got up and found a fresh sheet of paper and began to copy, carefully, everything that mattered, every transaction, every name, every date, every number that did not match what it was supposed to be. She worked until 3 in the morning, and when she was done, she had 2 copies. One that she put back with the ledgers, and one that she folded small and put in the lining of her boot, where it would take a determined person to find it. In the morning she waited until Caleb had his coffee, and then she put the ledgers in front of him. "You are not losing money," she said. "You are being robbed." He set his cup down very carefully. "Say that again." She turned the ledger and put her finger on the first entry. 3 years, she said, every quarter. Cattle sold to the same buyer at about 2/3 the market rate, a man named S. Vance, and every quarter that same sale is entered as a livestock loss. So on paper your herd is dying, on paper your land is failing, and a man whose land is failing and whose note is being watched by the bank can be foreclosed on, Caleb said. His voice had gone quiet in the way that meant the anger was real. "Lose the deed." "Who else has access to these books?" Mabel said. "Who handles your sales and your filings?" His jaw worked. "An agent in town," he said slowly. "Man named Pruitt. Came recommended about 3 years ago." 3 years, Mabel said. "By," Caleb said, and stopped. "By Vance," Mabel said. The kitchen was so quiet she could hear the fire tick. Caleb stood up. His chair went over backward behind him. He stood with both fists on the table, and he said in a voice like gravel on stone that 3 years was a long time to be blind and too proud to ask for help. "You asked me," Mabel said. "Yesterday, you asked me." He looked at her. "So you are not too proud. You just had not found the right person to ask yet." Something passed between them in the morning light over the overturned chair and the open ledger. Neither of them had words for it. It was the beginning of something, though neither of them was ready to call it that. Mabel looked down at the page. "We do not go to town with this today," she said. "The moment we do." Vance knows we know. Right now, we have the one thing he does not think we have. We understand what he is doing, and he does not know we understand. That is worth more than anything else we have. She closed the ledger. If we are going to fight Sterling Vance, we fight him when we have everything. Every number, every signature, every entry laid out so plain a child could follow it. Until then, you shake his hand and you smile at the man and you let him think you are exactly the broke, simple rancher he has decided you are. Caleb righted the chair. He sat back down. He looked at her for a long moment. You said he said. Mabel looked up. I meant you, she said. I misspoke. Sure, Caleb said, gently, not pushing. You misspoke. She got up to find something useful to do with her hands and her face, which had done something she had not given it permission to do. She had not meant to say we, but she had said it, and they both knew it. And in that plain kitchen on that October morning at Rourke Ridge, something that had been locked for a very long time shifted just slightly on its hinges. 3 days later, Sterling Vance came to the ranch. He came on a Thursday, which Mabel would remember later, not because of the day, but because of the light. It was the particular flat light of an October afternoon that makes everything look exactly as it is. No softening, no gold at the edges, just the plain fact of things seen clearly. She was at the kitchen window when she heard the carriage on the road, and she looked up and watched it come down the long approach to Rourke Ridge with the slow confidence of something that has already decided it belongs wherever it is going. It was a fine carriage, 2 matched grays, well kept, the kind of equipage that announced money not by being showy, but by being impeccably maintained, which was a more sophisticated kind of announcement. The man who stepped down from it was tall and silver-haired and wore a black coat that had been made for him by someone who knew what they were doing. He stood in the yard and looked over the land the way a man looks at something he is already pricing in his head. Caleb came out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sullivan!" the man called out, and then corrected himself with a smile that suggested the error was deliberate. "Forgive me. Rourke. Hard man to catch at home." Sterling Vance was 55 years old and had the look of a man who had already counted his winnings and was only waiting for the formality of being handed them. His eyes were pale and his smile was practiced, and he moved across the yard with his hand already extended. Mabel watched through the kitchen window as Caleb took it, and she held her breath for a half-second, and then released it, because Caleb's face gave away nothing, not one thing. He shook the hand and said something that made Vance laugh, and his expression was exactly what it needed to be, easy, unsuspecting, a man glad enough for company on a quiet Thursday afternoon. She had asked him to do a hard thing, and he had done it. Vance was still talking when his eyes moved past Caleb's shoulder and found the kitchen window and found her standing in it. The movement of his gaze was smooth and unhurried, the way a man looks around a property he is assessing, taking inventory. When it landed on her, it stopped for just a fraction of a second longer than it needed to. Then he smiled. He came to the door the way men like him came to doors, like the door had already been expecting him. Mabel opened it before he could knock because she would not give him the satisfaction of waiting. "Ma'am," he said, cool, and tipped his hat. And his eyes moved over her in the old familiar way, the quick arithmetic, the adjustment of expression, the polite resetting of whatever he had actually thought. But underneath all of it, underneath the practiced courtesy, was something she had not seen before in the men who looked at her that way. The men of Dust Creek had been cruel in the simple way of people who did not need to think about it. Sterling Vance was calculating. He looked at Mabel Holt, and she could see behind his pale eyes a man working out very rapidly what she was and what she might be useful for. "Sterling Vance," he said, I am an associate of Mr. Rourke's, and you are Mabel Holt? Something sharpened in his face, almost too fast to catch. Holt, he said. Not Horace Holt's daughter. Out of Dust Creek. The floor dropped an inch beneath her feet. She kept her face still. I know of your father, Vance said, and his smile widened. And it was the smile of a man who has just been handed something he was not expecting, but recognizes immediately as useful. Why? The whole county has heard about the arrangement at the Dust Creek market. Word travels fast in a small valley. He turned to Caleb with an expression of warm concern. I had no idea, Rourke, that you were the charitable soul who had taken the girl in. How very good of you. The neighbors can mind their own, Caleb said. Of course, of course. Vance tipped his hat again. I only mean that a man in your position, with your finances in the state they are in. He let that sit for just a moment. One has to think about reputation. An unmarried woman living under your roof, bought at a public auction. People are unkind. Rourke. They will say things, and a man's reputation is the only true collateral a bank cares about in the end. She watched Caleb's hands. They did not move. He did not take the bait, but she saw the needle go in, saw Vance watch it land, and then saw Vance look from Caleb to her and back again. And in that look, she understood something that made her stomach go cold. He had found it. Not the ledgers, not the land dispute, not the missing money. He had found the one crack in the wall, the thing that could not be defended with arithmetic, and he had found it in the first 5 minutes of his first visit, and his pale eyes were already doing the work of deciding how best to use it. Well, he said, settling his hat, I will not keep you from your afternoon. We will speak soon about the autumn sale. Rourke, I am sure we can come to our usual arrangement. He turned to go, then half turned back as if a thought had just occurred to him. Miss Holt! A small word of friendly advice. This is a small valley, and a girl with a story like yours would do well not to set her hopes too far above her station, lest she find them broken twice. He climbed back into his carriage, and the matched grays took him back down the long road, and the dust closed behind him. The yard was quiet. Caleb turned to her, and for the first time since she had known him, the careful steadiness in his face had broken through to something underneath. Not anger, not calculation, something closer to alarm. He is going to come after you, Caleb said. Not the land. You. He thinks if he can drive you off or break you or turn the whole valley against you before you can open your mouth about those ledgers, there is nothing left to hold against him. Mabel watched the last of the dust settle on the road. Then he has made a mistake, she said. What mistake? He thinks I am the weak point. She turned from the road and looked at Caleb steadily. He thinks because the whole world threw me away, I will break easy. She paused. But a thing that has already been thrown away has nothing left to lose. And there is nothing on this earth more dangerous than a woman who has stopped being afraid of being hurt. From around the corner of the house, where he had apparently been sitting in his rocker through the entire visit, Amos Greer let out a long, slow breath and said to no one in particular, Lord, that man does not know what he just walked into. Sterling Vance did not waste time. The first sign of it came 8 days later when Mabel went into town with Amos for thread and lamp oil and flour and found the dry goods store gone quiet the moment she pushed through the door. Harriet Peel looked up from behind the counter and then looked at the two women beside her, and the three of them exchanged a glance that Mabel had spent a lifetime learning to read. She read it now. Morning, she said. We are closing early today, Harriet said. It is not yet 11. Harriet's mouth was a thin line. Folks are saying things, Miss Holt, about you and about what you are doing out at that ranch with an unmarried man. I run a respectable store. There are decent women who shop here, and I cannot have that standing in it." "That," Mabel repeated. "You know what they are saying." Word came from a very good source. "Mr. Vance himself was in here Tuesday, concerned. Said he had seen it with his own eyes and did not know how to warn people gently enough." There it was, the needle in the smile, dressed as neighborly concern. Mabel set her list down on the counter very carefully, because her hands wanted to shake and she would not let them. "Mr. Vance," she said, "is a thief, and you are carrying water for him. Harriet Peel, and someday you will know it." She walked out with her back straight and made it all the way to the wagon before the trembling started. Amos climbed up beside her without comment. He clicked at the horse. They were a mile out of town before he said anything. "He is smart, Vance is. He cannot break the land, so he is breaking the woman who can read his books. Tongues do more damage than guns out here. Always have. He is not my problem," Mabel said. "No," Amos said, not looking at her. "But that boy back at the ranch is sure as anything yours, whether either of you has said so yet. And Vance knows it. That is the whole game. He does not have to prove a thing. He just has to make this valley believe it until Caleb is too ashamed and too alone to fight. And then the bank calling his note looks like mercy instead of murder." Mabel did not answer. She watched the road and thought about a silver-haired man who had looked at her across a doorframe and seen in 5 minutes the cheapest way to win. The rumors moved through the valley the way water moves through dry ground, fast and everywhere at once and leaving no clean place to stand. The Dunn brothers came back from a feed delivery with their hats pulled low and would not meet her eyes. When she finally cornered Silas in the barn on the 4th day and asked him straight what had been said and where, he was quiet for a long time and then said more words in a row than she had heard from him in 3 weeks. "Man at the depot said something low about you," he said. Cresswell hit him. The man's friends hit Cresswell back. "There are more of them than there are of us, Miss Holt, and they have all heard it from somewhere, and they all believe it. And I do not know how a man argues against a thing that has no body you can put your hands on." "You cannot," Mabel said. "That is exactly the point." She lay awake that night listening to the wind come down off the ridge, and the old voice came creeping back in, the one that had been with her since she was 12 years old, the one that knew exactly where to find the soft places. "You brought this down on him. He was fine before you came. A man like Caleb Rourke could have had any woman in this valley, and instead the whole county is laughing at him, and his land is in danger, and it is because of you. Because you are who you are, and you were where you were, and a man made the mistake of being decent to you, and now he is paying for it." She got up. She could not lie there with it. She pulled her shawl around her and went down the dark hall in her bare feet toward the kitchen. And that was how she came to be standing in the hallway when she heard the voices on the porch. Caleb's voice, low and still, and another man she did not know, a neighbor from the sound of him. "Come by late. Just saying it as a friend," the man said. "That is all." "Then say it," Caleb said. A pause, the sound of boots on the porch boards. "It does not look right," the man said. "The girl, a man in your spot, Rourke, with the bank already watching your note. You cannot afford the talk. Send her back or find some proper arrangement for her. But you cannot keep a woman like that and expect people not to—" "Not to what?" Caleb said. "Finish it." Another pause. Longer this time. "You could have any woman you wanted," the man said. "Best families in 3 counties would have you tomorrow. Prettiest girls, most sensible, most suitable. And instead you are hitched to gossip over—" He stopped. "You know what I mean. A man like you, and a woman like her. It just is not what? Natural. the man said, and let the words sit there on the porch between them. There, I said it. No shame in charity. Rourke. But you do not tie your name to charity. Mabel did not hear what Caleb said back. She had heard enough. She had heard the exact words she had been saying to herself since before she could put them in sentences. She had heard them in another man's mouth in the dark. Outside a door she was never meant to be standing behind. And it did not matter what Caleb answered because the man was right, and Mabel had known the man was right, and she had only been pretending otherwise since the night of the $40 wagon ride and the note that said, "Eat." She went back to her room. She did not cry. She was beyond crying. She lit the lamp and she took out the carpet bag she had brought from Dust Creek, and she began, calmly and without ceremony, to pack. In the morning, she had it decided. She found Caleb at the kitchen table with his first coffee, and she set the bag by the door where he could see it, and she said she would like her wages settled and a ride to the depot. There was a noon train east. He looked at the bag. He looked at her. He set his cup down. No, he said. It was not a question. She had not expected it to be. I am telling you I am leaving. I heard you. He stood. You were in the hall last night. Mabel. I know you were there. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it. Do not stand there and pretend you did not hear Tom Grady say what he said, because I can see from your face that you heard it and you went back to your room and packed everything you own into that bag. He is not wrong, she said. He is not right, either. He could have any woman in this valley, Mabel said, and her voice went thin at the edges despite everything she could do about it. The bank is nervous. The whole county is laughing. And it is because of me. Because you took in the woman from the auction, and now your name is in the mud and your land is in danger, and the kindest thing I can do for you, the only truly kind thing, is to get on that train before it gets any worse. She was shaking now. All the calm she had been constructing since midnight had gone. So settle my wages, she said. Please, before I lose my nerve. The kitchen was very quiet. Caleb came around the table. He stopped a few feet from her, careful of her space. Even now, you want to know what I said back to him. He said, last night, after he said what he said, you did not stay to hear it. It does not matter. I told him to get off my land, Caleb said. His voice was rough and plain. I told him that the woman he was talking about fixed a mill that 4 grown men could not, and found a thief that 3 years of my own eyes missed, and walked through the middle of a town that sold her without giving them one single tear to feed on, and that she had more courage and more plain worth than every comfortable gossiping coward in this valley put together, and that if I heard him or anyone else say one more word against her, friend or not, I would settle it the old way. He took a breath. That is what I said back. You just did not stay to hear it, because you had already decided the worst version of things was the true one. You always do. She was crying now, and she hated it. You should let me go, she said. It would be easier. Easier is not the same as right. You taught me that in the first week you were here. He did not reach for her. He just stood there. I will not make you stay, he said. I told you the first day. Anyone who wants to go, I hitch the wagon myself. So if you want that train, I will drive you to it, and I will pay your wages triple for what you have done for this ranch. And I will never say another word. But I will not stand here and let you leave believing you are leaving because you are worthless. He looked at her steadily. You are leaving because staying means hoping, and you would rather run than hope and be wrong. And I understand that. God knows I understand it. But do not call it kindness. It is fear. She had no answer for that. It was the truest thing anyone had ever said to her, and it was Caleb Rourke who had said it standing in his own kitchen, with his coffee going cold and his chair shoved back from the table. She stood with the carpet bag at her feet and could not move in any direction. And that was the moment the door opened and Silas Dunn came through it, gray-faced and breathing hard and smelling of smoke. "Fire," he said. "The north barn. Mr. Rourke. Someone cut the fence first. The cattle are running east in the dark. We had riders. I seen them. And Amos went in after the bay mare, and he has not." Silas bent over his knees. "He has not come out." Nobody moved for 1/2 second. Then everything happened at once. Caleb was already at the door, and Mabel saw it in his face, the impossible arithmetic of it, the thing Vance had built and timed and waited for. The cattle running east in the dark were the note, were the deed, were everything the bank had its eye on, and everything that stood between Caleb and losing the land his grandfather had pulled out of Kansas ground with his own hands. And the barn was fire, and Amos was inside it, and there was not enough time and not enough men, and Vance had made it that way on purpose. Save the herd or save the man, the land or the life. He had about 4 seconds to choose. "Silas," Caleb said, "get Cresswell and get water to the barn. Move." "The cattle," Silas said. "If we do not ride now, let them go," Caleb said. He was already pulling his bandana up over his mouth. "Cattle is money. We can lose money. We cannot lose Amos. Now move." And he was out the door and running north toward the orange light on the horizon, leaving behind him 30 years of his grandfather's work galloping away into the Kansas dark. Mabel looked at the carpet bag by the door. She kicked her shoes off so she could run and grabbed every bucket in the kitchen and went out the door after him. What she found at the north barn dropped the ground out from under her. The whole east end was a wall of fire so loud it sounded like a river. Cresswell was throwing buckets at the south wall with the look of a man who knows it is useless but cannot stop himself. Caleb was at the small door on the south face, throwing himself against it, the frame warped shut by the heat and the door gone rigid in it. From inside, muffled under the roar, she heard a voice, old and rough and still. "Amos." "The frame is warped," Caleb said. "I cannot move it." Mabel looked at the door. She had grown up watching her grandfather work wood, watching what heat did to it, watching where it gave and where it held. She saw it in 3 seconds. "You are pulling the wrong side," she said. "The top hinge is seized. The bottom is still good. You do not open it. You drop it." She jammed a length of fence rail along the top hinge plate. "Your weight on this," she said. "On 3. Caleb took the rail without question. 1. The fire roared. 2. Amos's voice, weaker. 3. They threw everything they had against the rail together. The rancher and the woman the whole valley had spent 3 weeks deciding was worthless. And the top hinge sheared and the door fell inward and the smoke poured out black and hot, and Caleb was through it before it cleared. There was a long, terrible stretch of time where Mabel stood at the fallen door and called his name into the smoke and heard nothing. The fire was eating the east wall now, the timber cracking in long, splitting sounds, and she called his name again, and then she stopped calling and just stood there with her hands at her sides, because calling was not going to do anything, and she needed to think, and she could not think if she was calling. Then 2 shapes, low and crawling through the smoke. Caleb with Amos's arm hauled over his shoulders, both of them black with soot, falling out into the dirt as the roof behind them came down in a tower of sparks that went 40 feet into the October sky. Amos was breathing, coughing his lungs raw in the dirt, but breathing. Mabel dropped to her knees between them, hands moving over Amos checking, over Caleb checking. Alive, alive, saw them both of them alive, and she was laughing and crying at the same time in the way that only happens when you have been holding something too tight for too long and suddenly do not have to anymore. The north barn burned to the ground. The cattle were a half-day's ride east and gone. They carried Amos inside before the last of the fire settled, laying him near the kitchen stove where the warmth was steadiest. And the three of them sat in the lamplight with the smell of smoke still on everything, and Amos wheezed out between coughs. "You let the whole herd go for an old fool and a horse." "The horse got out," Caleb said. His voice was barely there. "Good," Amos said. "Then it was worth it." Mabel, kneeling beside them with her feet bare and her shawl black at the edges, looked at this man who had just thrown away everything he owned without one moment of calculation, and felt the last door inside herself come off its hinges completely. She was not getting on any train. She had not been able to leave when the ranch was whole. She could not leave it now that it was burning. She had known this from the moment she kicked her shoes off in the kitchen, though she had not named it yet, and she was not going to name it tonight. Tonight there was only the lamp and the cold and the two men breathing beside her in the warmth of the stove. Caleb's hand found hers on the kitchen floor and held it. Neither of them said a single word about it. The letter from the bank came 3 days later, hand-delivered by a clerk who would not meet Caleb's eyes. Mabel read it over his shoulder at the kitchen table while Amos, still wrapped in a blanket by the stove, watched her face. "They are calling the note," she said. "Full amount. 30 days. Amos sat up. "The loan has 5 years left on it." They gave him 5 years. "They can call it early if the property is in default, Mabel said. And her finger moved down the page. "And here, listen to this. The property has been reassessed. As of last week, the Sullivan parcel—" She stopped and looked up. "Caleb, they are using the wrong name. This document refers to this land as the Sullivan parcel." "That was my grandfather's name," Caleb said slowly, "before he filed under Rourke. Somebody filed a new survey at the county office." Mabel said, "It has been reassessed. The creek frontage and the north sections are listed here as outside the deed line. They are saying those sections never legally belonged to this property." "The good land," Caleb said. "The water." She set the letter down flat on the table. "He is not trying to foreclose anymore," she said. "He is trying to prove you never owned it in the first place. The fire took your collateral. This takes the ground out from under the collateral. If the county says the land was never yours, the bank's note is secured against nothing, and Vance can make an offer on the reassessed portion for whatever he likes, and the county will call it legitimate." A sound came from Amos, low and grim. Mabel was already on her feet. "A survey is just a man with a chain writing numbers in a book," she said. "Numbers can be made to say anything. If Vance filed a new survey last week claiming the old boundary was wrong, then somewhere there is an original survey, the real one, filed when this homestead was first established. If I can find it and it contradicts his, then his survey is not a correction, it is a fabrication." "The county office burned in 73, Amos said. "Half the old records gone. That is how he has been working this whole valley. Buys up land where the papers got lost in the fire, files a new survey swearing it is correct, and who can say otherwise when the original is ash?" The kitchen went quiet. Mabel stood in the middle of it and thought about her grandfather's mill, about the way a man who spent his life building something of value kept the proof of it close, about the things that mattered most to careful men. "Your grandfather," she said to Caleb, "the one who built this place? Amos said he was the most careful man in the county, most careful man God ever made." Amos said, "Where did he keep his papers?" "Not in town," Caleb said slowly. "He did not trust town for anything that mattered." Mabel walked to the fireplace. She had looked at this fireplace every morning for 3 weeks. She had noticed on the second day that one of the hearthstones sat a fraction higher than the others. She had noted it the way she noted everything, quietly, without making a production of it, and filed it away because she did not yet know what it meant. She knew now. She crouched and pressed on the high stone, and it tipped, and underneath it, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, was a flat tin box. Her hands were not quite steady when she opened it. Inside a deed, a bundle of letters tied with cord, and beneath them, folded soft as cloth from years of being folded and unfolded, an original survey map, dated 1866, signed and sealed by a county surveyor named Thomas Bell, showing the creek, the north sections, every acre of the good land, every milepost and boundary marker, all of it square inside the Rourke line, exactly where it had always been. Mabel breathed. "There it is," she said. 13 years under your own floor." She unfolded the map the rest of the way and smoothed it flat on the table and looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at the witness signatures at the bottom of the page. Thomas Bell, County Surveyor, in careful official script, and below it, in the plainer hand of a man signing as a witness to the survey being conducted, confirming that he had been present and that the markers had been set as drawn, Horace Holt. Mabel went very still. The name sat on the page in her father's handwriting. She had seen that handwriting her whole life. On account books, on the deed to the farm, on the paper she had watched him sign in the market square of Dust Creek 2 months ago. Horace Holt. Her father had been present when this land was surveyed in 1866. He had stood on these acres and watched Thomas Bell set every marker, and he had signed his name to say it was true. He had known for 13 years exactly where this boundary was. He had known what Sterling Vance was claiming was false from the moment Vance started claiming it. Caleb was looking at her face. "Mabel," he said quietly. She set the map down on the table with the survey Vance had filed placed beside it. 2 pieces of paper, same ground. 2 entirely different stories about who it belonged to and where its edges were. She looked at her father's signature for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was level. "His name is right here," she said. "He was standing on this ground in 1866. He knows what the true boundary is. He has known what Vance is claiming is false since the day Vance started claiming it." Caleb said nothing. "Will you use it," Amos said from his chair by the stove, "against your own father?" Mabel looked at the 2 surveys on the table. She looked at the fire-stained walls of the kitchen and the door they had rebuilt after the barn burned, and the lamp that Amos had kept lit through every evening since she arrived. "I am not using anything against my father," she said. "I am using the truth." She folded the original survey carefully and held it in both hands. "Those are 2 different things." Outside, the October wind came down off the ridge the way it did every night now, cold and without apology, moving through the dry grass of Rourke Ridge like it had somewhere to be. Inside the kitchen, the lamp burned steady. They did not know yet that Horace Holt was already on his way. He arrived before dawn. Mabel heard the horse first, the sound of it coming fast down the north road and then pulling up hard in the yard. And she was at the window before she was fully awake, the cold floor under her bare feet and the dark outside still complete, except for the thin gray edge that meant morning was coming but had not arrived yet. Horace Holt dismounted in the yard below like a man who had been riding hard and had not slept and did not expect a welcome. He stood for a moment beside the horse with one hand on its neck, and even in the dark and from the distance of the upstairs window, Mabel could see that something had changed in the way he held himself. The deliberate blankness she had watched him wear through all the years of her growing up, the careful nothing he put on his face when he did not want to be accountable to what was happening in front of him, was gone. What was underneath it did not look like guilt exactly. It looked like a man who had run out of the energy it takes to pretend. She was dressed and downstairs before he knocked. She opened the door and they looked at each other across the threshold in the last of the dark. His face in the lamplight was older than it had been 2 months ago in the market square, or perhaps she was only now seeing it clearly for the first time, without the $40 and the crowd between them. He did not say he was sorry. She had not expected him to. Horace Holt had never been a man who moved easily toward the thing that cost him something to say. He said instead, "Vance sent men out last night. 2 of them. They were asking at the saloon in town which road comes out at Rourke Ridge." He met her eyes for the first time since the market square. "He knows you have something he needs to bury. He is not going to wait for the hearing." Caleb appeared at the top of the stairs. Horace looked up at him, then back at Mabel. "That is all I came to say." She looked at her father standing in her doorway in the before-dawn dark, having ridden 9 miles in the cold to say 4 sentences. She thought about the survey map in the tin box and his signature at the bottom of it, and the 13 years between then and now. She thought about $40 and the gray dress she had pressed in the dark, thinking they were going to town for flour and nails. She stepped back from the door. "Come inside," she said. "The coffee is hot." He came in. He sat at the kitchen table with his hat in his hands, and he did not drink the coffee she set in front of him, just held the cup. And the 3 of them stayed there in the lamplight, while outside the dark began very slowly to turn to gray. Caleb looked at Mabel. She shook her head once. Not yet. There were things that needed to happen first. They were ready when the men came. Vance had sent 2, which told Mabel something about how seriously he was taking the situation, and something else about how much confidence he still had, because a man who understood what she had in that tin box would have sent more. The 2 men came up the road after midnight, unhurried, expecting an empty barn and a sleeping house, and found instead Caleb and both Dunn brothers waiting in the dark with a lantern and a patience that had been building for 3 years. What followed was brief and one-sided. By morning, Vance's men were in the county jail in Millbrook on a charge of criminal trespass, and the hearing was 4 days away. Those 4 days had a particular quality that Mabel would remember for the rest of her life, the quality of time that moves slowly, not because nothing is happening, but because everything that matters has already been decided, and you are simply waiting for the world to catch up to what you know. She spent the days at the kitchen table with the lamp and the surveys and the ledgers and her own careful copies of everything, building the case in the logical order that would make it impossible to dismiss, starting with what anyone could verify and ending with what only the record could prove. On the second night, Caleb sat down across from her at the table. She kept her eyes on the paper in front of her. He said, "If this goes wrong at the hearing, it will not go wrong. If it does..." He waited until she looked up. "I want you to have somewhere to go. I have money set back. Real money. Enough to get you east and started clean somewhere no one has heard the name Holt or the word auction. You could go to St. Louis, Chicago. A woman who can read a set of books the way you can read a set of books. In a city that size, there is no ceiling on it." She looked at him across the lamp and the papers. "You are trying to send me east again," she said. "I am trying to make sure that if the worst happens, you are not standing in it with me." She set her pen down. "I have been the person nobody believes my whole life," she said. "I know exactly what it feels like to be right and have no one listen. The only thing that ever kept me standing was knowing more than the people who were trying to diminish me and never letting them see how much I knew." She looked at the surveys and the ledgers and the 3 years of careful wrong numbers that she had pulled apart line by line. "This is not going to go wrong, because I am not walking into that hearing with a hope and a theory. I am walking in with arithmetic, and arithmetic does not care what a room thinks of me." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something." She waited. 3 days ago, he said, before Vance's men came, I rode to the county seat and filed a document at the registrar's office. He reached into his coat and put a folded paper on the table between them. She looked at it without touching it. "Open it," he said. She unfolded it. It was a deed. She knew the form by heart now, had handled enough of them in the past weeks to read one in her sleep. This one was for the north sections and the creek frontage and the high pasture, the best third of Rourke Ridge, the land with the water and the grass that stayed green past August. Properly drawn, witnessed, filed, legally unassailable. The name on it was Mabel Holt. She sat very still. "I am not giving you anything," Caleb said. Before she could speak, he said it with a quiet firmness that told her he had thought about how she would hear it and had prepared for exactly this. "That is what I need you to understand first. This is not a gift, and it does not come with anything attached to it. Not an obligation, not an expectation, not a claim on your time or your choices or your future. You saved this land, not me. You sat at this table for 3 weeks, and you pulled a thief apart line by line with your grandfather's mind and your own 2 hands. And you did it before I even understood what was being done to me. This ground belongs to you because you fought for it like it was already yours. So it is." Mabel looked down at the deed, at her own name in the registrar's careful script. "You filed this 3 days ago," she said. "Before the hearing, before we knew if any of it would hold." "Yes." She looked up. "Why?" "Because," he said, and his voice was plain and without performance. "If I lose the hearing and lose the land and Vance gets everything he has been working toward for 3 years, I wanted there to be one piece of this ground that he could not touch, one piece that was already beyond his reach before he ever walked into that room." He looked at her steadily. "And because it was right, and I told you at the beginning, I do not generally need to be asked for that kind." Mabel sat with the deed in her hands for a long time. Then she folded it and put it in the inside pocket of her dress, close, and she picked her pen back up. 4 days, she said. Let us make sure he does not get the rest of it either. The county hearing was held on a Friday morning in the assembly room of the Millbrook Courthouse, which was the largest indoor space in the county and was full to the walls by the time Mabel and Caleb arrived. Vance had wanted an audience, just as Amos had said, and he had gotten one. Half the valley had turned out, ranchers and shopkeepers and their wives, people who had been watching the slow pressure on Rourke Ridge for 3 years without quite understanding what they were watching, and people who had heard the talk about the woman from the Dust Creek auction and had come because, human nature being what it is, a public reckoning draws a crowd whether it is going to be just or not. Mabel felt every head turn when she walked in. She felt the whisper move through the room the way she had felt it move through every room she had ever walked into. The adjustment, the assessment, the particular quality of attention that her body had always generated in public spaces. She knew this feeling completely. She had been living inside it for 24 years. She walked through the middle of it the way she had learned to walk through everything that could not be avoided, without looking for permission to be there, without apology for the space she occupied. The tin box was under her arm. The deed was against her heart. Sterling Vance was already seated at the front of the room in his black coat, silver hair neat, one leg crossed over the other, looking like a man who has come to watch a pleasant formality conclude in the expected way. When he saw her, his expression did not change, but something behind his pale eyes shifted, a rapid recalculation. There and gone in 1/10 of a second. She held his gaze until he looked away first. The 3 county commissioners sat at the long table at the front of the room. The head commissioner was a man named Aldous Breck, 60 years old, with the face of someone who had been listening to people argue about land for a very long time and had stopped being surprised by any of it. He called the proceedings to order without ceremony. The bank's lawyer went first. His name was Garfield Pruitt, and he was smooth and prepared, and he laid out Vance's case, with the efficient confidence of a man who has done this before in other counties with other properties and has always gotten the result his client paid for. He produced the new survey. He produced the reassessment documentation. He produced the called note and the chain of title argument and the legal reasoning that placed the creek frontage and the north sections outside the historical deed line of the Rourke property. He was thorough and he was persuasive, and when he sat down, Commissioner Breck looked at the documents in front of him with the expression of a man who does not yet see a problem. "This body," Breck said, "will hear any challenge to these findings before the boundary is made final." He looked across the room. "Is there anyone present with cause to dispute the record as presented?" Mabel stood up. The sound that went through the room was not kind. She heard it and she let it happen and she waited for it to finish. "I do," she said. The lawyer looked up with the expression of a man who has found an unexpected insect in his lunch. "Miss, this is a legal proceeding. You have no standing here to—" "She has mine," Caleb said, standing beside her. "It is my land, and she speaks for me." Commissioner Breck looked from one to the other. Then he waved a hand. "Let her speak." Mabel walked to the front of the room with the tin box. She set it on the table, facing the commissioners. She was aware of every person in that room, in the way you are aware of a physical weight, but she was more aware of the papers in front of her, and the papers were what mattered. "Mr. Vance's new survey," she said, "claims that the creek frontage and the north sections of Rourke Ridge were never legally part of the property deed. This survey was filed at the county office 12 days ago." She opened the tin box. "I would like to show this commission a survey of the same ground filed 33 years ago, in 1866, drawn and signed by County Surveyor Thomas Bell, and witnessed by 2 parties present at the time the markers were set." She unfolded the original survey and placed it on the table. "These 2 surveys describe the same land," she said. "They do not agree on a single boundary point. Mr. Vance's new survey moves the eastern line by more than half a mile." She let that sit for a moment. The commission has to ask itself one question. Which is more likely, that a sworn county surveyor set every marker wrong in 1866, and no one noticed for 33 years, and the error was only discovered 12 days ago by a man who stands to profit directly from the correction, or that the new survey is a lie? Vance's lawyer was on his feet. The original county records burned in the fire of 73. This document could be anything. "A forgery." "Thought you might say that," Mabel said. She did not raise her voice. "So let us not rest on the survey alone. Let us talk about why a man would go to the trouble of forging one." She opened the ledger. "For 3 years," she said, "Sterling Vance has been purchasing cattle off the land he now claims never legally belonged to Rourke Ridge. Every quarter. His name, his transactions, his prices, all of it recorded here." She turned pages to the commissioners. She had marked every relevant entry with a small, careful notation in the margin. "He bought this land's cattle at 2/3 the market rate, and every sale was entered in the ranch accounts as a livestock loss," which means on paper the ranch looked like it was failing, which made the bank nervous about the note, which is why the note is being called now. She laid the pages out in sequence on the table. A man cannot spend 3 years buying cattle off a piece of ground and then stand before this commission and swear under oath that the ground was never legally part of the property he was buying from. Either he was conducting fraudulent transactions for 3 years, or he is making a fraudulent claim today. He cannot have it both ways, and his own name on his own purchases proves he knew exactly where that boundary was the whole time. The room was very quiet. She looked at Commissioner Breck. "He did not find an error in a survey," she said. "He manufactured one. He waited until a fire destroyed the original county records. He spent 3 years creating a paper record that made a good man's land look like a failing venture. He arranged for the bank's note to be called at the same moment he filed his false survey so that the foreclosure and the boundary dispute would land at the same time, and the man trying to fight them would have to fight both at once, with no resources left to fight either. She paused, and when he realized that someone at Rourke Ridge had read his books and understood what he was doing, he spread a campaign of rumor through this valley, specifically designed to make sure that person would not be believed when she stood up in a room like this one. She looked out at the assembled valley, at Harriet Peel, who would not meet her eyes, at the men from the depot and the feed store and the church social, at every face that had ever made the small adjustment. "I am done being decided about before I open my mouth," she said. "The truth does not care what I weigh. It is on this table. Look at it." The room held its breath, and then from the back, from the last row of seats, a man stood up. Horace Holt had come in after the proceedings started and had sat in the very last row with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the floor, and Mabel had known he was there and had not looked at him because she had not been able to and still do what she needed to do. Commissioner Breck looked at him. "Do you have something to contribute to this proceeding, sir?" Horace Holt cleared his throat. "My name is Horace Holt," he said. His voice was rough, the voice of a man who does not speak in public and knows it. "I was present on the 17th of April, 1866, when Thomas Bell conducted the survey of what was then the Rourke homestead claim. I watched him set every marker. I watched him measure every line. He held his hat tighter. That is my signature on the bottom of that map as witness. I remember the day. I remember where I was standing. And every boundary shown on that map is where Thomas Bell set it and where I watched him set it." He sat back down. He did not look at Mabel. She did not look at him. But she felt something shift in her chest, quiet and complicated. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But something adjacent to it. The recognition that a man who had done a wrong thing was capable of doing a right one. That these two facts could both be true and that she did not have to resolve them today. Commissioner Breck picked up the 1866 survey and the new survey and placed them side by side on the table in front of him. He looked at them for a long time. The room was completely still. Then he looked at Garfield Pruitt. "Did you verify this new survey against the original county filing before you brought it before this body?" he said. "The original filing burned in 73, Pruitt said. There was no original to verify against." "There was," Breck said. "It was under a hearthstone at Rourke Ridge for 33 years. His voice had gone flat and cold. He turned to Sterling Vance. "Mr. Vance, is your name recorded as the buyer in these cattle transactions?" Vance had been very still since Horace stood up. The stillness of a man who is running calculations behind a face held deliberately neutral. He looked at the ledger pages on the table, and his jaw tightened by a fraction, and Mabel watched him make the decision that undid him, the decision to fight it rather than absorb it. "This woman," he said, and his voice came out too sharp, too fast, too stripped of the warm courtesy he had been wearing like a coat for 30 years. "This woman is an auctioned farm girl with a grudge and a stack of papers she could have written herself. You would take her word over mine, a man of 30 years standing in this county, over some bought charity case who—" He stopped. He heard it leave his mouth in the silence of the room. He heard exactly what he had said and exactly what it revealed. The room heard it too. Every person present who had spent 3 months listening to polite, concerned commentary from Sterling Vance about the unfortunate situation at Rourke Ridge heard in those 8 words the voice behind all of it, clear and unambiguous and self-convicting. Nobody in that room would ever again need to wonder who had been spreading the talk about Mabel Holt. Commissioner Breck set the surveys down. "Sheriff," he said, I would ask you to hold Mr. Vance for the present. This commission is referring the survey filing and the account records to the Territorial Court for investigation of fraud against the county. He looked at the bank's lawyer. The reassessment is void. The boundary of the Rourke Ridge property stands as Surveyor Bell established it in 1866 and as witnessed by Mr. Holt. The deed is valid. The note will be reviewed by this commission before any further action is taken by the lending institution. He folded his hands on the table. This proceeding is concluded. For one moment, the room simply absorbed what had happened. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, Cresswell Dunn began to clap, a single pair of hands, slow and deliberate, the sound carrying in the quiet room. Then Silas beside him. Then Amos from the end of a row with his blanket still around his shoulders, whooping the way he had whooped at the mill wheel, loud and without self-consciousness. And then it spread, one person and then another, until the whole assembly room that had come to watch Rourke Ridge change hands was on its feet, not for the deed, not for the legal outcome. For Mabel Holt, standing at the front of the room with an empty tin box and 2 surveys and 3 years of someone else's dishonesty laid out in plain arithmetic for any person in the valley to read. She stood in the middle of the sound and could not get a breath. The tears came, and she did not try to stop them, because she was past trying to stop things that were true. And this was true. This sound, these people on their feet, this valley that had spent 3 months deciding what she was worth, finally finding out they had been wrong. Caleb's hand came to rest between her shoulder blades, steadying. The way you steady someone who has been carrying something so long they have forgotten what it costs them. You hear that, he said, low and close. That is the sound of a whole valley learning what I knew the first day I ever looked at your face. Sterling Vance was led out past the people he had spent 3 years managing, past the bankers and the commissioners and the ranchers and their wives, and not one of them would meet his eye. The silver-haired man who had looked at Mabel Holt and seen only a weakness to use, walked out of that room a smaller man than the woman he had tried to break. Outside in the corridor, Horace Holt was waiting. He stood apart from the crowd coming out of the hearing room with his hat in his hands, and when Mabel came through the door, he did not move toward her. He waited, which was the right thing to do, and she recognized it as such, even in the complicated middle of everything she was feeling. She stopped in front of him. He looked at her directly for the first time since the day she was 12 years old, and had come into the kitchen at 6 in the morning and found him reading a notice from the bank, and had asked what was wrong, and he had said nothing in the way that meant everything. I took $200 from Vance, he said, to sign a paper saying the boundary survey had been lost, and to put you out of reach before the hearing came around. He said it plainly, without the elaboration that would have been self-defense. He had done enough of that in his life to know what it looked like. I was in debt. I was afraid. Those are reasons. They are not excuses. Mabel looked at her father. She looked at the way he was holding his hat and the lines in his face that had deepened since the market square, and the fact that he had ridden 9 miles in the before-dawn cold to give her a warning he did not have to give, and had then come to a public hearing he did not have to attend, and stood up in front of the whole valley and said what he knew to be true, when it would have been easier by a great distance to stay home. These facts existed alongside the other facts. They did not cancel each other out. She was old enough now to understand that the world was not organized that way. I know, she said. She did not say it was all right. It was not all right, and they both knew it, and she would not insult him or herself by saying otherwise. But she did not walk away either. She stood with him in the corridor for a moment in the middle of the crowd, moving around them. Then she said, "The farm. Are you managing?" He looked slightly surprised. Then he said, "Getting on. The north field came in thin this year." She nodded. I will send Amos over in the spring, she said. He knows the soil on that side of the county. Horace looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. She walked back toward Caleb, and she did not look back. But she heard her father's boots on the floor behind her, going the other direction, and she let him go without turning around. There would be time. Maybe. Or there would not. She could not know yet, but she had told the truth in that courtroom, and the truth had been enough, and she was not going to carry the rest of it into whatever came next. The valley changed after the hearing the way weather changes, all at once and everywhere. Harriet Peel came to the ranch on the following Tuesday with a jar of peach preserves and a directness that Mabel had not expected and appreciated more for its plainness. I was wrong, Harriet said. I let a dishonest man tell me who to distrust, and I was too comfortable in what he said to look at it straight. She set the jar on the porch rail. I am not asking you to forgive it. I am saying it to your face because I did not say the other thing to your face, and I should correct the record where I can. Mabel looked at the jar. I do not need your good opinion, she said. I found out this year that I could live without it, but I accept your honesty. That is something different. Come inside if you want coffee. There were others. Not all of them came. Some of the valley simply adjusted its understanding quietly, the way people do when they have been wrong about something they invested in, without quite admitting where the investment went. Mabel did not require the admission. She had learned that what other people thought of her was information, not weather. It could tell you things. It could not determine anything. On a Saturday in late October, 3 weeks after the hearing, Caleb came to the kitchen door where she was doing the books and said he had something to show her and asked if she would ride. She had learned to recognize by now the particular tone he used when he was not quite sure how what he was about to do was going to land. She closed the ledger and got her coat. They rode north from the house, up through the land she had walked and worked and defended, past the new barn rising on the foundation of the old one, past the creek running low in the late season, past the north pasture where the grass had gone to brown and gold in the October cold. The Dunn brothers had begun rebuilding the fence line on the eastern border. She could see Silas's hat moving along the fence a quarter-mile away. Caleb led them up this long slope to the high ground above the creek, the ridge that ran along the northern edge of the property and looked down over all of it. It was cold up here, the wind stronger, the sky enormous and pale blue the way Kansas skies went in October, wide enough to make you feel very small and very clear at the same time. He stopped the horse at the highest point, and she stopped beside him. Below them, the whole of Rourke Ridge lay open in the thin October light. The house, the new barn, the corral, the creek threading through the lower pasture, the road running south toward Dust Creek 9 miles away and getting smaller, the land that had been under survey and under threat and under fire, and was still here, still exactly what it had always been. She breathed. It was enormous and ordinary and entirely real. My grandfather stood here, Caleb said, the day he decided to file the homestead claim. He told me that when I was a boy, said he stood on this spot and looked out at all of it and felt like the first man in the world. He looked at the view, said a piece of land like this does not belong to you. You belong to it. Mabel looked at the valley below. She thought about belonging, about what it meant to belong somewhere after 24 years of being the thing that did not fit, the thing that was too much, the thing that needed to be managed and accommodated and eventually disposed of for $40 in a public square. She had fought for this ground. She had sat up through the cold nights with the lamp and the numbers and the 2 surveys, and she had gone into that courthouse and she had said what was true in front of everyone who had decided she was not worth listening to. And the ground was still here. She thought maybe her grandfather was right. Maybe you did not own the land. Maybe the land kept you. Caleb reached into his coat. He held something out to her. She took it. She already knew before she unfolded it what it was going to be, and she thought this was perhaps the same deed returned to her in some ceremonial sense. It was not. It was a new deed, drawn after the hearing, properly filed, covering the full property of Rourke Ridge in its correct and confirmed boundaries. Both names on it, Caleb Rourke, Mabel Holt, both names. She stood on the high ground, with the wind coming in off the prairie and the October sky enormous above her, and she looked at her own name on a piece of paper next to his, and she did not say anything for a long time because there was nothing to say that would fit inside a sentence. "This is not a proposal," Caleb said. He was looking out at the valley. "I know how you hear proposals, and I am not going to do that to you. A man asks you to be his wife, and you will hear the $40 in it. The market square, the ownership. I will not do that to you." She looked at him. "This is a piece of paper that says you are where you belong," he said, "on ground that is yours because you earned it. Whatever comes after that, whatever you decide, is yours to decide. I am not putting a condition on the ground." He looked at her then, directly, the way he had always looked at her, as if the only thing worth seeing was exactly what was there. "I am just asking one thing, the same thing I asked you before. Would you stay? Not because you have nowhere else to be, not because I am asking you to be anything other than what you already are, but because out of everywhere in the world you could go, this is where you want to be." The wind moved through the brown grass of the ridge. Below them, the valley lay still and wide and real. Mabel thought about the train to Chicago and the bank that had written to ask for her mind and the respectable life she could have built anywhere she went, because she had proven in a county courthouse in front of the whole valley that she was worth listening to. She thought about all of it, and she held it clearly because she was not a person who made decisions by not looking at the alternatives. Then she folded the deed and put it in her coat next to her heart. She took the hat off his head the way she had seen him do it himself 100 times, the small, easy motion of a man comfortable in his own life, and she set it back on his head with both hands and looked at him. "There is a bank in Chicago that wants my mind," she said. "They can want it." She stepped toward him, closer than she had allowed herself to stand to any man, since the morning she understood what a doorway could mean when the person standing in it was dangerous. She was not afraid. "You are the first person in 24 years, she said, "who looked at all of me and asked me to stay instead of finding a reason for me to go. That is not a small thing. That is the only thing that has ever mattered." She put her hand flat against his chest. "Yes," she said, "I will stay. Not because I was sold here, not because I have no other choice. I will stay because this valley and that stubborn old man on the porch and these books that would be a ruin without me and you. I will stay because I choose it. And that, Caleb Rourke, is the first thing in my entire life I have ever been free to choose out loud." They rode back down in the last of the October light, side by side, and neither of them needed to say anything about what had just been decided on that hill. Some things do not need to be said. They just need to be done. The wind came in off the Kansas prairie the way it always did, indifferent and enormous, moving over the ridge and through the dry grass and down into the valley below, where the creek ran on and the new barn stood on the old foundation, and the road ran south toward a town that had sold a woman for $40 and had not yet understood what it had thrown away. On the high ground above all of it, Mabel Holt stood on her own land in the long October light, and was not afraid and was not alone and was not for one single moment sorry that she had stayed. The woman they sold for $40 became the strongest woman that valley ever knew. She kept the books for Rourke Ridge for 41 years, and not one number was ever wrong. She outlasted 3 droughts and a flood and a bank panic and the slow turn of the century into something new and unrecognizable. She buried Amos Greer in the spring of 1891 under the cottonwood by the creek and stood at his grave without crying, because she had learned from him that some people leave a shape behind them that lasts longer than grief. She never went to Chicago. She never once, for the rest of her long and well-loved life, stood alone,